Have you ever wondered which American cars from the 1940s are so rare that almost nobody even knows they exist? Today, I'm going to reveal 10 authentic gems on wheels, models so exclusive and surprising they look like they came straight out of a secret museum. Some were produced in tiny numbers, others leapt decades ahead with impossible designs, and all of them have stories worth telling. If you think you already know all the legendary classics, stick with me, because this journey will change the way you see automotive history forever. Before we start, give this video a like if you love discovering cars that defined an era, and subscribe right now. Activate the notification bell and stay with me until the end, because I promise you're going to discover cars that will make you say, this really is a work of art. 1947 Studebaker Champion convertible. Did you know there was a car that practically changed the way America thought about automotive design right after World War II? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking down a street in 1947. The world was breathing fresh air, optimism, Reconstruction dreams, and in that landscape, a vehicle emerged that looked like it came from another era, the Studebaker Champion. This wasn't just a car, it was a bold statement. While most brands were still recycling 1930s styling because they lacked resources, Studebaker dared to break the mold. Look at its long, clean front end with crisp lines that previewed modernity, and that smooth, fast-back rear that looked sculpted by the wind. Some said it was a warning of what the 50s would bring. Others just stood open-mouthed when they heard it rumble past. Under the hood, this convertible carried an inline-six engine producing about 80 horsepower, which at the time was more than respectable for a mid-sized car. Its top speed was around 80 miles per hour, something that might seem modest today but felt like a breath of freedom in a country eager to accelerate into prosperity. But what really makes the Champion convertible a rare jewel is its scarcity. Only about 1,800 units of this drop-top version were ever produced. Picture the scene. A summer afternoon, the top folded down, the wind blowing your hair as you drive along an endless road. This car wasn't just transportation. It was a promise of the future, a way to shout to the world that everything was about to shine again. And how much is this work of art worth today? If you're lucky enough to find one perfectly restored, you could easily pay between $60,000 and $90,000. Its ahead-of-its-time design has turned it into an object of pure cult fascination. Here's a little-known fact. Studebaker developed this model while the company was still producing trucks and military equipment. The decision to prioritize an all-new design was so risky that many executives believed it could be the brand's downfall. But the opposite happened. The Champion convertible saved Studebaker's reputation and projected it into the future. 1947, Chevrolet Fleetline Aerosedan. They say there are cars that never fade from memory because they become part of the collective imagination of an entire country. The Fleetline Aerosedan is one of those rare chosen ones. You don't even have to close your eyes to picture it. Just look at any old photograph and recognize its descending silhouette, as unmistakable as a signature etched in metal. This wasn't just another car rolling off the assembly line. It was the reflection of a nation that, after years of sacrifice, was ready to show off its style and confidence again. The Aerosedan brought a fastback design to everyday streets, something that until then seemed reserved for prototypes or luxury European cars. When it appeared in dealerships, people would stop at the showroom windows, pointing in awe at that rear end cascading down like a waterfall of polished steel. At a time when everything invited people to look forward, Chevrolet understood that beauty itself could be an act of optimism. Under its hood lay an inline six-cylinder engine producing about 90 horsepower, which allowed this elegant fastback to cruise comfortably along open roads. Its top speed was around 80 miles per hour, but what captivated people most was the feeling of smoothness as it rolled, as if it were gliding over the asphalt. Although Chevrolet built a considerable number of units, today finding a well-preserved example is a real odyssey. For decades, the Aerosedan was the platform of choice in hot rod culture. Thousands of young enthusiasts bought them to transform into personalized machines, lowered suspensions, transplanted V8 engines, eye-catching paint jobs. For many, it was an opportunity to give a second life to an accessible classic. If a collector manages to find one in original condition, its value can exceed $50,000, and some examples command much higher prices when they retain factory parts. Here's a fascinating detail. This model offered an optional vacuum power shift, semi-automatic transmission, a forward-thinking invention that made driving smoother and more modern. It was a promise that the future was slowly arriving in the garages of everyday Americans. 1948, Tucker, 48. There are cars born from dreams so big they end up becoming legends. And if there was ever an automobile that embodied ambition, defiance, and genius in equal measure, it was the Tucker 48, also known as the Tucker Torpedo. Imagine yourself in 1948, discovering that a visionary named Preston Tucker dared to challenge Detroit's Big Three with a vehicle that looked like it had arrived from tomorrow. The Tucker 48 was much more than an elegant car. It was a rolling manifesto of innovation. Only 51 units were ever built, each packed with details so advanced that many engineers of the era didn't even know how to describe them. Under its long, low-slung body, a shape that seemed to float, it carried a rear-mounted flat-six engine, air-cooled and derived from a Franklin helicopter power plant. This mechanical heart produced 166 horsepower, a surprising figure that enabled it to reach about 118 miles per hour, almost unthinkable in a post-war American sedan. But what truly fired the imagination of anyone who came close to it was the central directional headlamp, nicknamed the Cyclops Eye. This mechanical eye swiveled with the steering to light up curves, showing that Preston Tucker was as obsessed with safety as he was with design. In fact, the Torpedo featured a windshield designed to pop out in a crash, seatbelts, practically heretical in 1948, and a body engineered to protect occupants in a frontal collision. Every detail of the Tucker told a story. Its minimalist dashboard, four-wheel independent suspension, disc brakes on all wheels. It was as if the future had slipped into post-war America uninvited. But that audacity came at a price. The big automakers saw the Torpedo as such a serious threat that political and legal pressure crushed the project. The dream lasted barely a year, but its legend has never stopped growing. Today, anyone lucky enough to see one of the 51 surviving Tuckers feels a shiver of respect. This is a unique piece that can easily exceed $2 million at auction. Every unit bears, engraved in its chassis, the whisper of an era when one man dared to look the industrial empire in the eye and say, "We can do better." 1947 Hudson Commodore. 8. Hudson was a brand known for its bravery. While many automakers played it safe in the post-war years, Hudson decided to gamble on an innovative low-slung floor architecture that placed the center of gravity much closer to the asphalt. The result? Surprising stability in corners and a sense of control that made any driver sigh with delight as soon as they dared to push the accelerator. If you're used to driving a car that grips the pavement with confidence, you partly have Hudson's engineering genius to thank. Under its long, elegant hood, the Commodore 8 hid an inline 8-cylinder engine that delivered around 128 horsepower, more than enough to turn every trip into an exciting adventure. Its top speed hovered around 90 miles per hour, which at the time made it practically a rocket with leather seats. The deep growl of the engine, the whisper of the wind when you lowered the top, the promise of freedom, everything was contained in this machine. Fewer than 2,000 convertible units were built in 1947, making this model a true rarity. Many didn't survive the decades. Others were modified until they lost their original essence. That's why, when a collector manages to find one well-preserved, it's cause for celebration. Today, its value can range from $80,000 to $120,000, depending on the level of restoration. But beyond the price tag, this car offered something no label could buy: accessible luxury. The Hudson Commodore wasn't only for millionaires. It was the car an accomplished professional could dream of owning, a symbol that after the war, America was ready to reward effort with beauty and comfort. Here's a detail I always love to share. Hudson's advertising didn't just talk about power. It spoke of the feeling of sitting in the car, not on it. That simple phrase captured its entire spirit. When people drove the Commodore, they immediately understood they were living a different experience. More intimate, more connected to the road. 1945 Packard Custom Super Clipper. If there was ever a car that truly represented the essence of American luxury before and after the war, it was the Super Clipper. This automobile was not content with merely being elegant. It aspired to be the standard-bearer of a golden age in which class and distinction were measured by the length of the hood and the gleam of the chrome. Picture yourself in 1946, walking along New York's Main Avenue. Among the taxis and the first post-war vehicles, a Packard Super Clipper convertible gleamed under the sun as if every inch of its bodywork had been polished with the ambition of a nation emerging from the shadows. This model was special from the moment it was born. Production began just before World War II, but the line was halted to manufacture airplane engines and military components. When the war ended, Packard resumed production in very limited numbers, making each unit an almost unattainable object of desire. Under its enormous hood beat an inline 8-cylinder engine with a displacement of 356 cubic inches, capable of delivering about 165 horsepower. It was a power plant as smooth as silk, silent, with such generous torque that it could propel this colossus to speeds close to 100 miles per hour, all while the driver hardly felt any effort. The Super Clipper did not seek the aggressiveness of sports cars. Its virtue was something else. It was a rolling salon that invited you to travel for hours without fatigue, wrapped in an aristocratic hush. The interior was simply a haven of opulence. Fine wool upholstery, genuine wood details, instrument dials with illuminated faces that looked like jewels. This was the car chosen by bank directors, industrialists, and movie stars. In the advertisements of the time, the brand proudly proclaimed, "Ask the man who owns one." And it wasn't pretension. Whoever could afford a Packard belonged to an elite that set trends. Very few units were produced after the war. The exact number is still a matter of debate among historians. But it is estimated that only a few hundred were made. Today, finding an authentic and well-preserved Super Clipper is like discovering a lost painting by a great master. It's not surprising that its auction price can easily exceed $150,000, especially if it retains original parts and complete documentation. One fascinating detail: during the war, Packard built V12 engines for the legendary P-51 Mustang fighter planes. Many say that this experience instilled in the brand's engineers an obsession with precision that later manifested itself in the Super Clipper. So, if you ever have the chance to sit behind its wheel, remember that you are touching a small piece of history. 1941 Chrysler Thunderbolt. Few times in automotive history has a manufacturer dared to break all the rules at once. The Thunderbolt was exactly that, a radical experiment that looked like a UFO when it first appeared in 1941. And I'm not exaggerating. Even if you look at it today, it still seems like an object decades ahead of its time. A vision of what mobility could be when imagination is freed from any limits. This car wasn't a mass-produced model, but a concept car, a rolling laboratory designed to dazzle the public and prove that Chrysler could dream as boldly as any European brand. Only 5 units were built, each assembled by hand with almost obsessive meticulousness. The body was made entirely of aluminum, a material that back then was reserved for the aerospace industry. This detail not only made it light, but also extremely expensive, turning the Thunderbolt into an indulgence reserved for a very select few. The design was pure aerodynamic poetry. Smooth lines wrapped the entire chassis, hiding the retractable headlights that emerged when you switched on the lights. There were no door handles. They opened with an electric button, a detail that left people speechless when they saw it at auto shows. The roof was retractable and also operated electrically, something so advanced that it seemed like witchcraft to people in the 1940s. And as if that weren't enough, the windows were also electric, a novelty that wouldn't become common until 2 decades later. Under its spectacular body rested a straight-8 engine with 323 cubic inches of displacement, capable of delivering about 143 horsepower. Although its power wasn't extreme, the Thunderbolt didn't need more to leave an unforgettable impression. The real show was in its shape, in the silence with which its body glided through the air. Many visitors to the auto salons remembered the first time they saw it as an almost mystical moment. Today, each of the 5 surviving Thunderbolts is a museum treasure. Its value is so extraordinary that it's estimated none would sell for less than $1.5 million if one came up for sale. In fact, several examples belong to private collections that rarely display them in public, adding an aura of mystery and legend to its story. A fascinating detail: the name Thunderbolt evoked the power of the military aircraft that were beginning to dominate the skies, and Chrysler chose it to emphasize the connection between aeronautical technology and automotive design. That car was more than a prototype. It was a statement that the future wouldn't just be faster, but also more elegant and daring. 1948, Oldsmobile Futuramic, 98. There are cars that are born with a name so evocative, it feels like they're announcing an entire era. The Futuramic didn't just carry a title that sounded like science fiction. It was one of the first cars to make real that promise of modernity America dreamed of after the war. When it rolled out in 1948 with its fastback body and streamlined silhouette, many felt they were finally stepping into the future. Oldsmobile wanted this model to symbolize a new beginning, a break with the past. That's why they named it Futuramic, an invented term that combined future and dynamic. And it wasn't just wordplay. This car represented a bold leap in design, technology, and attitude. Its fastback body had a smooth, clean, elegant rear slope that made it look like it was moving even when standing still. For a society used to square, upright lines, it was almost an artistic provocation. Under the hood lived a powerful Rocket 5.8 engine with 303 cubic inches of displacement, a power plant that produced around 135 horsepower, though in the first units built in 1948, some examples still carried a conventional inline 8, while the transition to the new block was being finalized. The Rocket 5.8 would go on to become one of the most influential engines in American history, but even in this Futuramic, you could feel the seeds of that revolution. The car could reach speeds close to 93 miles per hour, doing so with a smoothness many rivals envied. Production in its first year was limited, since Oldsmobile was reorganizing its supply chain after the war. There are no exact figures, but it's estimated that only a few thousand units left the factory in 1948, which today makes these examples highly prized by collectors. A curious detail few people remember is that the Futuramic was one of the first mass-produced vehicles to offer power steering as an option, an innovation that would forever change the way Americans drove. For drivers accustomed to wrestling a huge steering wheel with both arms, this assistance felt almost miraculous. Today, finding a 1948 Futuramic 98 in good condition is like discovering a forgotten chapter of automotive history. Its value can easily exceed $50,000, especially if it still has the original engine and intact Futuramic badges. 1947, Cadillac Series 62, convertible. If there's any car that embodies the moment when America regained its confidence after the war, it's the Series 62. This model was more than a luxury vehicle. It was a promise that elegance, optimism, and sophistication would once again become part of everyday life. When it debuted in dealerships, many Americans saw it as a symbol that finally the darkness of the war years was behind them. This car featured a design that anticipated an entire aesthetic revolution. Gone were the harsh, square, pre-war shapes. Its body was lower, wider, and wrapped in smooth curves that embraced every metal panel. It was impossible not to stare when it drove by with its top down, proudly displaying an interior upholstered in the finest leather. I'm not exaggerating when I say that for many people, this Cadillac was the first time the word glamour was applied to a mass-produced American car. Under its long hood beat a 5.7-liter 5.8 engine, delivering around 150 horsepower, a respectable figure for its time. It could reach a top speed of 96 miles per hour, but more than the power, what impressed everyone was the smoothness with which the V8 propelled the nearly 2-ton body. The hydromatic automatic transmission, which Cadillac offered as a major innovation, made driving feel effortless, almost as if you were floating over the pavement. Approximately 6,700 units were built in 1947, a number that might seem high today but was quite modest compared to the mass production of later decades. That's why a well-preserved example is now a collector's gem that can easily fetch over $90,000 at auction. What's fascinating about the Series 62 convertible isn't just its looks. It's the fact that it marked a turning point in Cadillac's design language. Its more rounded lines, the enormous chrome grille, and its stately presence anticipated the aesthetic that would dominate the 1950s, when the brand would become synonymous with ultimate luxury. Many historians agree that this model was the bridge connecting the classic world with the modern era of the American automobile. A curious detail that often goes unnoticed. This Cadillac had an advanced heating system that distributed warmth evenly throughout the cabin, something especially appreciated in the colder northern states. With the top down and the icy wind outside, the driver and passengers could travel in comfort, as if they were relaxing in their living room. 1941 Lincoln Continental Coupe. There are cars that are born destined to become icons, not because of their power or their rarity, but because of the purity of their lines and the story they carry. The Lincoln Continental is one of those chosen few. For many designers and collectors, this model represents the very definition of American elegance. In fact, it was so perfect that Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the most influential architects of all time, called it the most beautiful car ever designed. The story of this Continental begins with Edsel Ford, son of Henry Ford and president of the Lincoln Motor Company. During a trip to Europe, Edsel was captivated by the low-slung sports cars with balanced proportions. When he returned to the United States, he asked his head designer, Bob Gregory, to create a personal coupe inspired by those European automobiles he so admired. This is how a prototype was born that, in Edsel's own words, had to be elegant, understated, and absolutely unique. The design was so captivating that when Edsel began using it as his personal car, friends of the Ford family pleaded with Lincoln to build it in series production. The company decided to produce a small quantity, and in 1941, approximately 850 coupe units rolled out of the plant before the war halted everything. That limited number is one of the reasons why today it's nearly impossible to find them in original condition. Under its long hood rested a 4.8-liter flathead 512 engine, producing around 120 horsepower, a more than respectable performance for a car whose focus was silent luxury and distinguished presence. It could reach about 90 miles per hour, but few owners cared about the top speed. What mattered was the feeling of majesty behind the wheel. One little known fact is that this Lincoln inaugurated the Continental designation, which would become a legendary sub-brand within Ford's luxury lineup. Additionally, its design, with the semi-exposed spare wheel in the rear, the famous Continental kit, set a trend that dozens of manufacturers later imitated. Today, the 1941 Lincoln Continental Coupe is considered a museum piece. Its value can easily exceed $200,000 if it's in pristine condition, and it's not uncommon for collectors from around the world to compete to acquire one. 1947 Ford Super Deluxe Station Wagon Woody. This Ford wasn't just a family transporter, it was a status symbol. When it appeared after the war, few could afford a Woody. Its production required enormous amounts of carefully selected wood and an artisanal process that no other body style demanded. That's why its production volume was relatively low. Fewer than 10,000 units were built. Today, surviving with the original wood intact is so rare that every well-preserved example is treated like a museum piece. Under the hood beat a reliable 3.9-liter flathead V8 engine, capable of producing about 100 horsepower. Although its power might seem modest, the true charm of the Woody wasn't in racing, but in the sense of freedom it offered. With the roof loaded with surfboards or luggage for a weekend on the coast, this car became an icon of American culture, especially in California, where generations of surfers adopted it as their inseparable companion. The top speed was around 80 miles per hour, although its sturdy chassis and considerable weight made every trip feel more relaxed and unhurried. The real luxury was being able to look out the window knowing you were driving something no one else in your neighborhood had. The interior was simple but comfortable, with wide benches and wood details that extended the warmth of the exterior. One curious detail that always surprises people seeing a Woody for the first time. Every set of wood panels was unique, cut and assembled by hand. No two units were exactly the same. This made the manufacturing process slow and expensive, which is why Ford abandoned this style just a few years later, when steel became cheaper and mass production proved more profitable. Today, a restored Ford Super Deluxe Woody with original wood can exceed $150,000 in value, especially if it retains its patina and matching chassis numbers. For many collectors, it's the vehicle that best represents the optimistic and adventurous spirit of the post-war era. And that brings us to the end of this journey through the rarest and most fascinating American cars of the 1940s. If you felt that spark of nostalgia and excitement, you're not alone. These cars aren't just machines, they're living stories that continue to inspire generations. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Which of these models would you love to have in your dream collection? Or which one surprised you the most? Leave me your comment below. I love reading your stories and finding out which car stole your heart. And if you still want more, I invite you to discover another video you're going to love: the most beautiful and elegant cars of the 50s. Click and join me, because I promise you'll fall in love with every detail. See you there.